Good evening, and welcome to the January 15th, 2019 work session of the Town Board of the Town of Ossining. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, we have a big crowd, bigger than usual, like times 3. I want to just let everybody know we have one work session item this evening on the agenda, and we are going to start with that in a few minutes, but I do have some announcements before we begin. We are looking at some very cold, wet, and possibly snowy weather coming up for this weekend. Thursday evening, we heard we might get some snow into Friday morning commute, possibly turning into rain, then back to snow, and possibly a big storm Saturday night into Sunday night. So in the case of snow, please remember to observe all parking rules in your neighborhood. For the town, unincorporated, it's simple. No overnight parking is allowed at all until March 31st, rain or shine. Please make sure you also don't leave your car bumped out into your driveway to make it more difficult for our plows. Make all necessary preparations at your homes and businesses. Fill up your cars with gas, stock up on salt and non-perishable groceries. And of course, everybody always wants milk, so don't forget to get milk and bread. Make sure you have plenty of flashlights and batteries. Keep an eye on the town website and our town Facebook page for any weather-related delays, closures, or general updates related to the possible inclement weather. On a related note, there are still many seasonal decorations on individual grave sites at Dale Cemetery. We respectfully request that you remove seasonal decorations at Dale by February 1st, or they will be removed by cemetery staff, weather permitting, the first week of next month. Thank you for your help in keeping our beautiful spaces clean as we get the grounds ready for snow. Please remember the second half of Ossining and Briarcliff Manor School District taxes are due by January 31st. You can come drop off your payment in person. The tax office is on the 3rd floor of 16 Croton and is open Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. and will be open special longer hours until 6 p.m. on Wednesday the 30th and 31st for your Wednesday and Thursday, 30th and 31st for your added convenience. You can also pay your bill online, which is an easy and inexpensive way to get instant proof that your payment was received, subject to collection from your bank, for the $1.50 e-check. As of last fall, you can use the dedicated postal slot at the Ossining Post Office, which will get your bill delivered to us directly. It doesn't have to go through White Plains, or you can mail your payment to us. Please keep in mind that if you choose to mail your payment, we can only accept a payment as timely if it has a postmark made by the United States Postal Service dated on or before 1/31/2019. If you use bill pay from your bank, please be aware the date you process your bill pay request is not a valid USPS postmark, so you must recognize the risk of timely payment. Make sure you leave plenty of time for your payment to arrive at our office. We are also working our way into exemption season, and I wanted to share the following information from our town assessor. The New York State Department of Taxation and Finance reminded property owners ages 65 and over who are applying or reapplying to receive the Enhanced Star exemption in 2019 that they must now enroll in the income verification program. Those already enrolled in the IVP don't need to take any action to continue receiving their Enhanced Star exemption. New IVP enrollees will likewise automatically receive the exemption each year they're eligible following signing up for it. In the first year of enrollment, the assessor will verify eligibility based on the income information provided by the homeowner. In subsequent years, the New York State Tax Department will automatically verify eligibility. As a result, homeowners will no longer need to renew the exemption or share income tax returns with their local assessor's office following this year. This change applies only to seniors 65 or older applying for the Enhanced Star exemption or those who have the exemption included in their property tax bills. This does not affect those who receive a check for this exemption because New York State Department already verifies income eligibility. If you already receive the Enhanced Star exemption but aren't yet enrolled, you must renew your application for the Enhanced Star exemption and enroll in the IVP. The forms were already mailed to you. Please submit as soon as possible, but prior to May 1st, 2019. If you're also receiving the senior citizens exemption, here's where it gets extra super complicated if it wasn't already, you'll still need to annually renew that benefit with your assessor. The renewal application will be mailed to you the first week of February. In the past, seniors who qualified for the senior citizens exemption were automatically granted the enhanced star exemption. Beginning in 2019, you must apply separately for both exemptions. The deadline for all exemptions, veterans, senior, disability, county firemen, clergy, nonprofit organizations, etc., the deadline for all exemption applications is May 21st, 2019. Please call the assessor's office if you have any questions, 914-762-8274. Now for the fun stuff. This Thursday, January 17th, join the Ossining Documentary and Discussion Series at the Boudars Theater for a screening of Heal, a film that asks us to consider the fact that our bodies are much more capable of healing themselves than modern medicine has led us to believe. The screening begins at 6:30 p.m. and will be followed by a panel of speakers including food educator, chef, and owner of Good Choice Kitchen, Lori Gershgorn, psychotherapist and founder of Sacred River Healing, Alan Levin, and acupuncturist Leah Schwartz of Lifted Hearts Healing Arts. Don't miss this thought-provoking and free event at the Ossining Public Library this Thursday evening. On Saturday, January 19th, something special is coming to Good Choice Kitchen. Come at 7:30 to hear live jazz by Rio Nova, a trio comprised of local musicians Martin Aronchik, Richard Brooker, and Ossining resident Nancy Carmichael. Treat yourself to an evening of jazz standards, tropical tunes, and more. Come hungry, the kitchen will be open and ready to serve you. This is a very cool way to wrap up your weekend for just a $5 cover charge at the door. On Saturday, January 26th, Westchester Collaborative Theater will host their midwinter rock to rap dance party featuring DJ Johnny J, a local Ossining resident and popular live event DJ for many decades. Come dance off your post-holiday blues and boogie with your friends and neighbors starting at 6:30 p.m. down at 23 Water Street. Tickets are $20 at the door, and there will be a cash bar and refreshments available. Visit wctheater.org for more info. Also, I think that there's something this Friday night at, which I can't get because my phone's turned off.
Exemption deadline is May 1st, not May 21st.
Did I say 21st? I read May 1st. Exemption deadline is May 1st, not May 21st. Sorry for any confusion. There is a concert this Friday night at 8 p.m., I think at Ossining Arts Council at Steamer Firehouse. Yeah. And I think you can get information at oac.org, I want to say, Ossining Arts Council. So you can look that up. That's also happening. And I think that there's some kind of an art opening starting the 19th. And we'll try to have more information for you about that at our next meeting, because I do think it goes for some time. But I think the opening, also Ossining Arts Council, is January 19th. That's next. I just wanted to get the art stuff out of the way. So this coming weekend, we will be observing Martin Luther King Jr. Day all around Westchester County and right here in Ossining. So be sure to mark your calendar for some of these local events. On Saturday, January 19th, Ossining's Cooperative Scholarship Fund will be holding their annual fundraising event at the Ossining High School Auditorium at 3 p.m. This event honors the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and is dedicated to closing the achievement gap. Ossining educators and elected leaders will be joined by guest speaker Peekskill Mayor Andre Rainey to celebrate this year's honorees, including William Broadnax, Mary Rainey, and the late Cadoza Woody Worthy. Tickets are $30 each. Then on Sunday, January 20th, join BOMA, Briarcliff Ossining Ministerial Association, for an interfaith service of remembrance at Congregation Sons of Israel at 1666 Pleasantville Road in Briarcliff. The event begins at 7:30 p.m. and will feature special guest speaker Abdul Malik Negadu, a Muslim chaplain and educator, speaking on the topic, Our Common Beliefs. All are welcome. Also, please be reminded that Town of Ossining offices will be closed on Monday, January 21st, in observance of the holiday. This is also a day of service, so please take a look at the Westchester County website for opportunities to lend a helping hand as we honor Dr. King. We will be back bright and early on Tuesday, January 22nd to assist you. Finally, I want to remind everyone that this Thursday, January 17th, we will be holding 2 sessions to offer further insight into some of the survey results from Project Forward, our initiative to look at ways to offer savings and streamline services in the town. We will be at the Ossining Public Library from 12 p.m. to 1:30 and 7:30 p.m. to 9, and we'll also have GoTV there, thank you, Tom, to videotape, and hope to hear from more of you about what you think of some of the ideas for savings. These include reducing some of our non-policy setting elected offices to allow for departments to be more easily maximized. Please take a look at the Project Forward webpage, which can be accessed from the Town of Ossining homepage, or you can go directly to projectforwardtoo.com. And that way you can get a little bit more background, or watch our work session from November 7th, which you can find on the YouTube channel at about 46 minutes in on the town, also on the town website. And that is it for my announcements. I will see if my colleagues have some additional ones. Councilwoman Feld.
On Friday, January 25th at 7 p.m. at the Ossining Boat and Canoe Club, Scott Craven will have a talk about the, a lecture and slide presentation on critters that walk, fly, and swim in the Hudson Valley. Scott Craven discusses mammals, birds, snakes, fish, and more in our area. The public is invited free, 1 Westerly Road, Ossining. So again, that's Friday, January 25th, 7 p.m.
That reminds me, I believe Eagle Fest is coming up. I want to say it's February 6th or 7th for snow date. And I do believe that our town historian, Scott Craven, will also be doing his annual bird and history walk at that time. Anybody else? Any events?
Yes. On Thursday, January 31st, the county will be hosting a listening session to inform its housing needs assessment, and that will be taking place from 6 to 8 p.m., again on Thursday, January 31st, here at the Community Center. And this is an opportunity for everyone to come out and talk about what they perceive as their most pressing housing needs, whether it's high cost of rent or taxes or not enough options, whatever it is. Come and talk about your housing needs. And this is sponsored by the County of Westchester. And again, it's a county-wide housing needs assessment. Thank you.
And I'm just going to clarify that the Ossining Arts Council concert this Friday night is Jan Close, K-L-O-S-E, and is available, I think, on brown bag tickets. So I have nothing more. Are you still not ready, Mr. Vetramile? Okey doke. So anyway, this evening, the topic of our discussion is the River Knoll project that Glenn Vetramile of Hudson Park Group LLC and Annette Bourne of Sam Schwartz Engineering are going to be talking to us about. While the River Knoll project is still before the town planning board, the town board asked Glenn and his associates to visit us to discuss some items they believe pertinent for the town board to be considering at this time. As a reminder for the public, this is a work session, and the primary purpose is for the town board to learn more, ask questions, and deliberate where appropriate. We will not be taking any public comment tonight. Tomorrow night, they will be back before the town planning board to review the first draft of the final environmental impact study. So it's not a draft environmental impact study, it's the final environmental impact study, but the first draft. There will be public hearings as we continue with the review process, so town residents will have many opportunities for further comments. And I will turn it over to you if you want to talk about anything without these materials.
I just think I'm going to be very well organized in this document.
Okay.
I sort of feel.
I guess I could just say that does anybody want to take a short break and just wait for those materials to come? Because there's really not a whole heck of a lot else we were doing tonight except for waiting for you to talk to us. So,
You don't have your stand up.
do you have anything else you wanted to talk to us about at this lovely work session? Like she's like.
No.
I was just going to say if we wanted to go over a little bit with the public about a little more depth about where they are in the process and what's going on right now, just to fill the minutes.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
So you had talked about how they're still before the planning board. and David obviously weigh in. So what the planning board is still doing right now is serving as lead agency for SECRA. And you indicated that there was a final environmental impact statement that had been prepared. What the applicant had previously prepared was a draft environmental impact statement, which went through a series of environmental analysis with respect to different aspects of the project and how there could be, what those different environmental potential impacts or how it would be affected in the community. So based upon the draft environmental impact statement, members of the public, as well as this board, because you are a lead agency, because the project will require a zone change, which is a legislative act, were allowed to make comments and provide their thoughts and input. And those substantive and relevant comments, the applicant then took and responded to, which is the substance of the final environmental impact statement that has been circulated and that we'll be discussing a little bit more tonight. Once that's going through a review process, I understand as well, in conjunction with the planning board and the town's consultants, and I think the town board will weigh in at some point, hopefully, probably soon, maybe after this meeting, if you're ready. And then the planning board will continue its lead agency analysis. Once that's done, the planning board will adopt a finding statement, and all the involved agencies, including this board, will adopt a finding statement, at which point the secret process will be complete, and then it'll move on to the actual application process for those approvals that are required for the project.
Okay. Mr. Stallman, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that was pretty complete.
Okay. Fantastic. In that case, we will now let you take it from here, Glenn and Annette. Guys are on.
Please mention if anybody wants something here. Okay, so we have, start over. I'm Glenn Vetromile with Hudson Park Group. We've been before the boards for about 4 years and have gone through the draft EIS, and now we're in the final EIS phase. And as part of the EIS review, we get into looking at various alternatives for the site. And we've been doing that for a while. And so we thought it would be a good discussion at this point in time to look at those alternatives, but then also reflect on how those alternatives look relative to our project. So we have ended up with 8 alternatives, 2 using the R15 zone, and behind this document you have a table that looks at the major impacts and then compares them to the various alternatives. And then behind that table are the 8 alternatives. So in the first instance, we were asked to look at the R15 zone, which is essentially large lot single-family homes, both in a conventional setting and then in a clustered setting. And then we were asked to look at R5 zone, which is essentially a single-family zone, and also looking at that as a conventional layout, and then as a townhouse cluster layout, but using the same number of density, 67 units. So if you're looking at the top line project description, you can kind of go across. Then we were also asked to look at the multifamily, the MF zone, with the underlying criteria, and that would yield about 150 units. And then as a multifamily, as a single structure. And then alongside that, alternative EB is, again, using the multifamily zone, but as a townhouse layout. And then the next column down is multifamily at 8 units per acre, as a single structure. And then lastly, 8 units per acre as a townhouse. structure. And then you can flip back and look at the various, plans. The plans were done by my architect. A lot of time and effort went into each one of those. So starting on the next line down, zoning, that's the zone that was applied. And then the next line down kind of talks about the percentage of green space that would be remaining after post-construction. So during construction, our project and almost all these projects have construction impacts to the property through grading, but subsequent, when it's all said and done, parts get replanted and vegetated. And so that line looks at all of the various alternatives and comes up with the approximate amount of open space that would remain once it's all said and done. And kind of working left to right, ours would be about 3/4 of the site is green. The conventional single family uses virtually the entire site and would take down all of the trees. The townhouse cluster would leave more, about 40% of the site as green, but removing most of the trees. The single family conventional leaves 35% of the site, taking down most of the trees. The townhouse cluster, 30% of the site would be green, taking down most of the trees. And then the MFD multifamily is essentially using the exact same footprint as our site, our project, but just reducing the number of units by 38. The multifamily townhouse would leave only about 9%. The MFD at 8 dwelling units per acre, again, exactly the same footprint as our building, but fewer units at 160. Again, leaving the same amount of open space as ours. And then lastly, the townhouse at 8 units leaves only 35. So with the exception of the multifamily, with the exception of using the exact same footprint, all the other alternatives use up more of the site, would take down all of the trees. And this is done through calculating. These alternatives were done over about a year and a half of going back and forth between ourselves and the planning board. So they just weren't done overnight. The next line down gets into, gets into traffic, and it shows the peak traffic levels, both AM and PM, the lower two lines. But more importantly, I think, is the resultant level of service. Our proposal, we're going to be spending about $1 million to improve the intersection of 9A and Croton Dam Road. We're adding queuing lanes, both eastbound and westbound, and that allows traffic that's heading eastbound on Croton Dam Road to cars that want to queue to go through will stay in the center lane, or to go north towards the Croton Harmon train station, they would stay there, but the cars that want to head south on 9A are not impeded and they can go around. Similarly, coming westbound, the cars that want to have to head north on 9A are not impeded because they will now have a lane that's not part of the through stacking lane. That improvement is going to cost us about $1 million to do. It requires us to move 5 telephone poles with fiber optic cables on it, and then obviously the improvements and some retaining walls. And that is something we took upon ourselves to do. Nobody asked us to do it. And we have been before New York State DOT for 3 years. DOT, we've submitted our concepts to DOT, and importantly, I think this is very important to understand, they accepted our concept. They could have come back and said, look, we want you to do something else. We want you to improve other intersections along 9A. They said, no, we like what you've done, and they've blessed it. So the next step would be to prepare construction documents and literally build it. So above that, where it says peak traffic levels, service levels, C to E. So intersections are measured A through F, and then various levels in those gradations, sublevels, and so if you kind of skim across, almost all of them operate at a level F. And because none of the alternatives would have the improvements, ours will operate somewhere between a C and E at peak hours because of the improvements. So then working down further, fiscally, our project will be tax positive to the town and to the school. It's because a fairly large amount of revenues, about $1 million, will be generated by the project in tax revenues. Not so with some of the others. The single-family projects in particular will have a fairly high generation of school-age children, and necessarily the school district has to pick up that cost. So the tax revenues thrown off by those alternatives are negative to the school district. So those are the big highlights relative to the chart. I was going to get into, I didn't realize you'd have both sides in that. So I was going to get into kind of describing our project relative to how it's age targeted, the cost of exactions, building cost premiums, and operating cost premiums, necessitating the size. So why don't I go through that and I'll take a bunch of your questions. So many of the projects that are being built today, the ones in White Plains, the Hudson waterfront in Yonkers, downtown, New Rochelle, and some of the ones on the east side in Rye and Harrison, tend to be focused on millennials. And every time you pick up a newspaper, you can see that they're oriented to millennials. And the millennial market, we feel, is only so deep. There's a very deep demand, unmet for empty nesters, people that have homes whose children have left, and the people no longer want to have a house. They don't want to take leaves out of the gutters. They don't want to take care of driveways and have lawns cut, and they want something that's kind of a simpler lifestyle. And also, they don't want to pay real estate taxes anymore. Real estate taxes in Westchester have risen precipitously over the last 2 decades, and continue. And so it's a way of getting out from under that burden, but still these people want to be in their own town. They want to have a footprint there. They may take some of the built-up equity out of their house and buy a second home somewhere. So this site being a green site as opposed to a TOD, a site next to a train station, we think it inherently will attract a more mature renter. So we also think that as people age and their kids leave the house, that a congregate style form of living becomes more attractive. You have friends and neighbors around you. In this case, we'll have a fitness center with a yoga studio. We'll have a dog daycare center. We have a club room. We'll have a business center. And it's a way for people to have friends immediately around them as opposed to being in a single-family home. So one of the other things, too, relative to our density, the code requires us to build 10% affordable, and that's at 60% of the AMI. So it's a fairly punitive requirement. And we, on average, just a very, very rough rule of thumb, it takes 2 market rate units to support 1 affordable unit. So if we're at 188, 19 of those units are affordable, it then takes 38 units that are market rate to support the 19. So essentially 19 plus 38 is 67, do I have my mouth right? Units that are essentially not free market. And from our standpoint, it's very punitive. If it were at 80% of AMI or some higher percentage, it would be something else. But these are units that get relatively little income relative to the cost to build and operate them. And then, of course, the other, what we call exactions or expenses that are above and beyond just the cost of building or buying the property are these. It's $1 million we're going to be paying for the improvements to 9A. We've also been working with the school district for about 4 years now with Ray Sanchez, the board, and the administration. We have an agreement that we'll pay them dollars over the first 2 years of our project that will go where the school district can use them for improvements to rooms. And that, again, once again, it was not something that anybody asked us to do. We went out and we reached out very early on to Ray. The other cost premium of this project is, and I'd like to contrast it to the Avalon project, which is a beautifully executed project, but it appeals to a completely different renter. The Avalon here, Ossining, we have underground parking which will be hidden, so people surrounding it won't see any parking, except for some on the north end, surface parking, but very little. And contrasting that to the Avalon project, it doesn't have a garage. So a non-garaged multifamily project appeals only to a younger renter. An older renter with a bag of groceries coming home at 9 or 10 o'clock at night doesn't want to walk across an icy parking lot or a rainy parking lot to go inside. They want to go into a secure garage. People, women don't want to be out in a big parking lot at night without security. In this case, we'll have a garage with a gate. You'll go in and be a well-lit garage. You'll go into an elevator alcove, go up to the main lobby, and then get your elevator up to your floor. And that is another sort of contrast to Avalon. Avalon does not have elevators. You either from grade walk down, walk in at grade, or walk up 1 or 2 flights to your unit. And again, an older renter will not be appealed to an older renter. And then lastly, the project has a very high level of amenity, and that's necessary to appeal to an empty nester. These people are moving out of houses that are spacious, have amenities, may have an outdoor patio, a barbecue, a pool. And so they're looking to go into something that has those amenities as well. We will have a pool. As I said earlier, we'll have a fitness center, a yoga studio. We'll have instructors at different times. We'll have a dog spa. We do think that an older renter will likely, we think a very high percentage of the renters will have dogs. I would if I was there. And then the amenities of the project, the finishes of the project, we will put in hardwood floors in all of the living areas, closed loop pile, carpets in the bedrooms, washer dryers, and a full amenity package. And then lastly, because it's appealing to a more mature renter, the costs of operating the building are higher than most. We will have a concierge service to receive packages. People increasingly are getting packages from Amazon and the like, and also foods delivered during the day. And so we'll have a refrigerator, a big refrigerated room off of the main desk that will receive refrigerated foods so people, when they come home after work. And then there's the staffing for the pool, for the fitness center, for business center. We have a very large open space, several acres, so we're going to have a fairly large staff to take care of the open space, and then, of course, security staff. So all of those things add up to a need for a certain density of project. And if you look at the impacts relative to the other uses of the property, the other alternatives, we can debate them all day long, but we feel that the impacts like traffic, where we're going to be improving the level of service at 9A, we're going to be tax positive to the school district, and where we're going to leave 75% of the site as green. That whole meadow along Croton Dam Road, which is a quarter-mile in length, is going to stay green. None of these other alternatives do that. So that's really been our design focus at the outset. The other thing, too, we did a balloon test.
Could you repeat that again?
To repeat,
The part about the open space along Croton Dam Road.
it's about a quarter-mile in length.
Right, and none of the other alternatives have that?
None of the alternatives, other than the ones that use the building as the same footprint.
Seems like some of the alternatives have that.
Excuse me?
Seems like some of the alternatives have that. I was just,
These are the ones that use the same footprint, too.
right, so it's not none of the alternatives.
Okay, so the alternatives that use the same footprint have it. But if we're talking about single-family or townhouse, and from a developer standpoint, the easiest part of the site to use would be the front meadow. It would require the least amount of roadway, least amount of infrastructure, easily the least expensive to use. So, and we did it because we wanted the neighbors to feel that, you know, this site was going to be preserved as best it could. And the existing development of the hospital, which is 9 buildings, is primarily situated on the top, but also the east side of the building, east side of the site. All of those other buildings on the east side of the site, particularly the southeast corner, all go away and get turned into green space. So all of the neighbors on Pershing and First and Second and Narragansett all will have a deeper and bigger green space. And similarly, the neighbors on Grandview, currently there's a arts and crafts building that literally abuts that northern boundary. That'll be gone, and that'll all be turned into green space. So why don't I take some questions?
I've got a couple of questions regarding the alternative comparison. The alternative comparison. And I won't comment on townhouse cluster, alternative B or alternative D because I haven't seen those before. But isn't alternative EB 132 units, not 160 units?
I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at it. There could be typos.
And isn't the post-construction green space for alternative EB much more than 9%?
EB?
E, small b.
Underlying townhouse.
No. EB is if that. No.
Actually, there's more open space on EB than on FB.
David, honestly, if we're talking 1 or 2 or 3% difference,
No, EB had, you say FB has 35%. EB has more than that, but it's only shown as 9%. So we're talking about 9% versus 45% perhaps. I think it's a typo.
where are you looking? So I have EB in front of me.
Right.
So do you like EB? You think EB is okay? So on the chart it's wrong? Okay.
So EB is 132 units,
It could be a
No,
typo.
but oh, yeah, it is.
It could be a typo.
and the open space is more than on.
So David,
Yeah.
we were able to complete the alternatives this morning. And we had wanted to get your input, and we didn't get it till Friday afternoon.
But not on that column.
And so preparation of this chart was stalled because we didn't get your information till then. So we rushed through it, causing Nanette to finish it tonight, and that's part of the reason we're here late.
Okay,
So if there are typos, don't blame us for it.
okay. Can I ask another question? Could you explain, I don't really understand the peak traffic level of service. You've got C and E, what does that mean?
Levels of service.
So morning is C and afternoon
No,
is...
during various movements have C level, and various movements have D or E. They aren't all C. Each movement, whether it be southbound or northbound, will have a different level of service.
Okay. So if you look at all the other columns besides the proposed project, they're all worse, right?
Without the improvements, yes.
Okay. So I guess what you're saying is that if you were to go to alternatives FA or FB at 160 units, there would be no traffic, those bypass lanes would not be put into the project.
We couldn't afford it.
Okay. And I guess you're saying that at 160 units, there would be no contribution to the school district other than property taxes.
That's right,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
The 60% imposition of affordable is really, it takes a really big toll. It's, again, if it's 80% be one thing, but 60, and Karen does this all day long. She knows the cost of building this stuff, and it's very expensive. You're talking about almost 20 units, almost 20 units.
28 units.
19 units, 19 affordable units. So
No, no,
I said
I was talking about the
almost.
reduction from 188 to 160.
Yeah, I'm just going back to our proposal, which is 19 units. And the cost of that, just throwing out a wild-ass number, is, $6 to $7 million to cost to build those affordable units. Plus the $1 million to pay for the improvements to 9A, plus the monies to be given to the school. It's a lot of money.
I'm not trying to be critical, I was just trying to clarify what your proposal actually is.
It's one thing if it were a very simple wood frame structure, a home that might cost, in total $225 a foot, all in. This is, something very different. It's a very expensive building to build, and the 19 units are going to be in, not even arguably a luxury project.
Yeah, but Glenn, let's remember that policy was in place when you initiated this project. It's not going to change. So that you knew that going in.
Yeah, I'm not complaining. I'm explaining.
And the 10% affordable goes down if your total units go down.
Your economy of scale does.
No, yeah, but
It's not.
if you're saying it's 67 is your
Yeah, but this
break
is a
even at that
difference.
188,
This is
that's a lower number.
The
for-
difference is that it's one thing to have a 10% affordable imposition on a 400-unit project, where all the operating costs and the extraordinary costs that I described are amortized over a lot of units, so that the cost of supporting that 10% is not as impactful. But if this project were only 100 units, and still trying to provide a project that has this level of amenity and all of those extraordinary costs and payments, it doesn't pencil. Just doesn't pencil.
Yeah, but again, I think we have to look at the intent of that, because I feel like we're hammering on this and it's not going to change, so.
I'm not,
You know, we recognize.
explaining, that's all.
No, we recognize that, but that's a given. And, you know, it's really based on needs, and it's also just the reality of the world that we live in. We need a certain amount of affordability. And some people would argue 60% doesn't even get, 60% AMI doesn't even come close to that. So it's just the reality of
look,
you know,
I'm not,
our world,
I think
so.
towns have to provide affordable housing, particularly in a very high-cost community, county like Westchester.
Right.
For all the reasons I talked about, high taxes and all of that. And you and I had conversations on staggering it, where there might be 20, 40, 60, 80, 100% of AMI.
Right.
We had looked at the existing structures on the site, the homes. There's a doctor's home that's currently going to be raised. There's an admin building with resi units above it. And you and I had talked about potentially converting those to additional affordable.
Well, again, it's not my decision to make, because
I know.
those are based on established, you know, we have an established housing code, so you know, that's not really my decision to make, although it's good that you know, you looked at that, but again, you know, getting back to what we're doing, it's completely understood that adding affordable units adds cost to a project. That's not, nobody's debating that. I just think that we need to really talk about the recommendation that makes the most sense for this particular property, this site, from your perspective as well as the community's perspective.
Right, I mean, clearly, it's a balancing act. And I
It
think,
is.
you know, what you have hammered home every time you've been before this board is you can't move off that 188 units without not making a change to the, not paying for a road improvement and not making a payment to the school district. You have not budged from that. So even in the recommendations, even in, you know, the same footprint with, you know, fewer units, your claim across the board has been that you're not going to make those improvements, and therefore, there's no reason to even compare to a certain extent.
You know, it's not just Glenn Vetromile getting up in front of you and saying what all of these projects go to. There's a financial community out there of sophisticated investors, life insurance companies, banks, and they, you know, there are name brands that only do the majority of larger financings, and they all have criteria and benchmarks that they look at relative to things like percentage of affordable. They look at the operating costs. They look at all of these things, the percentage of land cost exactions relative to total budget. And they have these guidelines and to underwrite. And if you don't fit into those guidelines, you don't get financed. I can tell you that in the alternatives world today, if you're talking about townhouses or single-family homes, there are projects in this area, in Briarcliff right now, single-family home projects that are just languishing with built homes. They can't sell them, they can't finance them because people can't get end loans to the prices that the developers want to sell them at. You can go into Fairfield County, go talk to any broker, in backcountry Fairfield County, in any one of those towns, the prices have dropped over the last 5 years at least 20%, if not more. They continue to drop. So, and then with townhouses were the first asset class in the last downturn, 2009, 2010, where the banks ended up with huge portfolios of unsold townhouse units. They're the asset class that takes the biggest hit the earliest. There are a number of banks that will not finance townhouses. This town has a lot of townhouses. The values have not risen very much in the last 10 years.
But
You
in the
don't
last
need-
2 years they have.
Excuse me?
I said in the last 2 years they have. At least, certainly in the last year.
And right now, interest rates have risen. All of the banks, particularly, you know, they look at New York City. New York City has an overabundance of condos. The entire banking community has gotten much more conservative underwriting for sale housing, townhouses, single-family, condos, and buildings. They require higher levels of equity. They require stronger balance sheets, so there are fewer and far people that can do them. And Westchester's not, Westchester is the same. So it's very risky. I would not do one right now because we're in a market where it's, see the stock market going up and down. Who knows what's going to happen a year from now?
I don't think anybody would debate that there are ebbs and flows in the real estate market over time, and we certainly have seen them here in Ossining, whether it's townhouses, McMansions, smaller homes. Everything goes up, it goes down, goes this way, it goes that way. So I don't think anybody would debate that. In fact, that's one of the comments that we've heard from the public is that there's no guarantee that high-end rentals are going to be something that's going to last into the long term. And I would say based on what the argument you just made for townhouses, you couldn't disagree that would be the case because right now,
No, I don't agree.
these are hot, but
agree.
in 10, 20 years, they might not be.
No, I don't agree. If you look at the immediate areas, whether it be Briarcliff, any of these towns, unless you go down south of 287, there's been a de minimis amount of multifamily built. You've got Ginsburg, you've got Avalon. They're full. They leased up overnight. And there's tremendous demand because it's local, but you go north of here, there's nothing. And, Ginsburg did a project in Peekskill, but that's it. So relative to additions of rental property, there's been very little over the last 20 years. But with townhouses, you build it all, and then you sit there with inventory, and if it doesn't sell, the cost of building is already in place. You can't rent it. So you could be out 2-3 years before you've sold it out, and interest will, burn a hole in your pocket. And again, the last downturn, townhouses were the first asset class to get taken back by the banks. There were no apartment buildings taken back. None of them. They all get rented out. And the rents might drop a little bit, but they weren't foreclosed on.
Do any of my board colleagues have questions?
Well, I understand that I think it is moving toward rentals. I think the empty nesters are looking for this type of property. I talked to a lot of people who are in high-end homes and the salt tax is going to kill them, and they are looking for a luxury rental. My challenge is this is too big for me, and I'm not willing to approve anything without the improvements to the highway and the drainage. So I'm in a bad spot right here. Like, it's too big, and I'm not doing anything without the improvement to the highway. So that's my position.
I think, Glenn, you touched on something. I have to be honest, I don't share my concern, my colleagues' concern about the size, because based on the size of this this property compared to other very similar, I think they're all 188 units, that seems to be the magic number. This is actually a much, much larger property. And I think with the, I'm
The physical
to be honest, I'm a
property
little bit
itself.
more concerned about size in other parts of the greater town of Ossining that are not in our purview. But it's not the size so much. I think you touched on something that I hear increasingly as a concern. So if prices drop, then how does, because the real big issue, one of the biggest issues, not the only issue, is the impact on the schools. So if prices drop and families stay longer, or there ends up being more children, that's a concern. Do you have any thoughts on that?
If rental prices drop, well, they still operate. They operate at a lower yield. So instead of operating at a 6 or 7% yield, it may operate at 5% yield. But it still operates, still covers its costs.
So how does the, if there's a change in the need for, or the demand for a high-end, how does that impact the amenities, the dog spa and the other things, the amenities?
You
Do
can't
they-
afford to operate them.
Okay,
The staffing, staffing for a pool, we kind of use as a rule of thumb around $100,000 a year. And, so you have to start chipping away, and then it's a vicious cycle. So once you start chipping away at amenities, it gets reflected in the rent.
right.
And so you think you're going to be saving money, but a renter comes in, the perception is less because you have fewer amenities, and then they'll say, well, instead of paying $2,300 a month for a one-bedroom, I'm only going to be willing to pay $22. So it's from knowing the market and kind of looking at the competitors, but also getting a sense of, I don't want to say it's a craft, but it's just after doing it enough years, I kind of have a sense of what the amenity package is of a certain demographic. And if we're appealing to an empty nester, they're coming out of a house. They're not like a kid coming out of college that'll, take 4 kids in a 2-bedroom unit, which they do in the city. But they want a decent-sized front alcove. They want a washer and dryer. They want reasonably spacious bedrooms and all of that.
On the topic of the empty nesters, I still have some concerns, because these empty nesters that I know are moving south, or they're moving to communities in Westchester that are walkable, and where you're at is not going to be walkable. So I still have concerns about the data that's saying that that's going to be a viable option for empty nesters.
I think there are people that want something that's more walkable. What we feel is deeper is people want to have a connection to their community where their friends are. So I don't see somebody living here going to New Rochelle. I don't see somebody here necessarily going down to downtown White Plains. Where the new highly amenitized projects are, I can recite them all, I know them all. There's one on Bank Street in downtown that Elcor did. There's a project that's going up right now in New Rochelle. A company called RXR is doing it, and there are a bunch of things on the Hudson waterfront. I do not see somebody from here going downtown to the Yonkers waterfront. It's almost 2 miles off of I-87. You have to go through Yonkers to get to the waterfront. It's clearly a millennial market. And, we could all debate what the market is like in downtown White Plains. And New Rochelle, I don't see a renter from here going all the way over to New Rochelle. I just don't see it.
You focused a lot on the empty nesters, and basically said you don't think that this is going to attract millennials, but in the FEI.
No, I think millennials will go here too, but I don't, the difference is there are buildings that are being built today that I don't think will be attractive to an empty nester.
Okay.
But are attracted to a younger renter. But
I guess my question is going kind of around that, because this is particularly appealing to empty nesters. You're still not willing to commit to that because you think that it's going to negatively impact your lease ups. In other words, you don't want to do 55 and up. Thank you.
yeah, the problem with age restricted is that it does restrict the market dramatically. It takes out, do you really want an F55 plus? Do you really not want to have millennials? Do you really not want to have 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds?
I think it might solve some of our school crowding problems. I think it would be something the community would be in favor of.
Well, let's talk about kids for a second. The 2 recent projects you have, the Avalon and the Ginsburg project on the waterfront, they have 16 or 18 kids for each one of those. So you're saying 1 kid added more or less per grade. So is that a major impact? It's not like you're going to get 40 or 30 even, And relative to the highly tax positive to school district, the revenues that are thrown off these projects. And it's across the county, it's not just this town. Nanette, her company has surveyed all of these projects, does it on a regular basis, looks at all of the new projects throughout the county. And we sat down with, so we have gotten from the school district the experience, those numbers. And then we also sat with Ray and with his administration and board and came up with the numbers that are in our EIS, which are higher. You know, we gave them the benefit of the doubt, but we used 3 different methodologies to arrive at those numbers. And they're still low. In our case, they're in the 20s in terms of kids generated, but the experience we still believe will be much less than that, and it's based on all the projects in the county. So you can come up with all different methodologies. The Bruchel-Listigan is and Bruchel-Listigan is the methodology. It's from Rutgers University. When the school district does its forward planning, they use that methodology to figure out what the impact, what they can expect relative to school children generation. So we use the same methodology.
I mean, a lot of people have debated if that's still relevant, because I think it was developed many years ago. So not everybody agrees that the Rutgers methodology is the best methodology, even though everybody still seems to use it. I do think that the letter from the school district and also some of the accompanying comments from some of the members, kids in the district, question the rate at which you were saying tax positive. I'm not disagreeing that it's tax positive in a little bit, but it's not to the extent that necessarily that your numbers suggest, because the average cost per student you use is pretty low. I think you were using 13,700 or something like that, which seemed like you came up with, and I'm not exactly sure. The numbers looked a little wonky.
This is her.
Okay, but I mean, obviously, yeah, go ahead. Hi, Nana.
A couple things on the schools. With regards to the cost, the pupil cost that was given to us by the school district. And it really is a number that reflects state aid. So we didn't drive that number, it was given to us. And it's the number that is available from the state education department. A couple comments on the school generation rates.
Yeah, but I just have to go back to that. So the numbers that are used for state aid aren't necessarily reflective of what actual per pupil costs are. I mean, let's face it, the state doesn't reimburse for full costs of anything. So they use low numbers. I mean, just because that's the numbers used for state aid doesn't mean that that's what actual per pupil costs are.
I mean, as we all know, the taxation and the cost per pupil is a very complex formula, we specifically asked the school district the number for us to use, and that was the number that we were given. Whether we use the actual cost or the cost that they gave us, we would be tax positive in the sense of the impact to the taxpayer, not necessarily to the school district, because as we all know, the school district's formula with the tax cap is an issue that every community is facing, and whether or not it's just or right or fair or whatever, it is an issue with Albany, not with our project or not with the school district. One thing having to do with the school generation rates is, I personally don't like Rutgers. I try not to use it. And when I hear it being used, I have 10 different reasons why it really fails to accurately portray the school generation rates. Right now, the best study that I have seen that is looking at our communities in Westchester is a study that was done by WXY for New Rochelle. And even though New Rochelle is not a community that is similar to Ossining, it's a community that looked at the villages, including Tuckahoe, it looked at Mamaroneck, it looked at Bronxville, it looked at White Plains and Yonkers as well. but it took in communities that are building similar type multifamily housing, and it was it's one of the best studies that I've seen, and it's on the New Rochelle's website. It was very comprehensive. It was you can tell, you can ask David, it was a very expensive study that was prepared by the city. And when you, I'm sorry?
What was the name of that one again?
If you go on, would be on the DOZ, if you look at the DOZ zoning for the city of New Rochelle, and you look at a study that was done by WXY, and you'll find their study. And I'll try to send you a link if you like for that tomorrow. And in fact, what WXY found is that the school generation rate, if you apply those rates to our project, we're in the 16 to 19. So we're even lower.
I'm not actually debating the number of children or students generated. I'm debating the average cost per pupil that you've come up with. And no, I'm sorry. Like, I think that the math is a little strange, based on, I'm going to just say page 337 in the FEIS. It doesn't look like it makes sense to me, based on the annual net cost for a mainstream K-6 student is $14,195 and $13,770 for 7 through 12. And then an annual net cost for students in K-6 special ed, $60,708 and $60,283 for 7 through 12. And somehow that blended cost only gets to $13,982. I don't know. I didn't do the math, but it seems a little wonky to me, so I'd love for you guys to take another look at that. And that's really my question, is that those numbers and, the following comments from the superintendent, which are on page 338, 3J5, and also from Jess Vecchiarelli, seem to question the formula for identifying the value of the benefit that you've both offered to the school district as that one-time payment, as well as the general offset. And I'm not questioning that it's tax positive, because I believe it is. I'm just questioning what the actual numbers are. I don't necessarily agree that it really makes sense the way that you've calculated that per pupil cost. So it's going to still be positive. The other thing that I do want to say, which is a little bit more in your favor, and I think wasn't exactly taken into account from the school district, is that there is a growth factor included in the tax cap calculation. So the tax levy amount is allowed to exceed the 2% or CPI, whichever is lower, by a growth factor when you add bricks and mortar to the municipality. Thank you. So that would actually benefit the school district beyond just the number by adding, a growth to the community that would allow the school district to levy a little bit more without necessarily increasing anybody's taxes, because the offset of the increased assessment would basically theoretically make up for that difference. So I'm just saying that again, that's another offset, a positive offset, which you haven't really talked about and which didn't exactly come up in that letter, but I still have an issue with that other number.
I will check that number. With we've spent a lot of time talking with not only the superintendent, but the lawyer that represents them. And we have tried to come up with a variety of ways to explain that we actually understand and we get that the school district is maybe not benefited in the way that Albany should be benefiting the school district. And short of saying that we feel your pain and there's not much we can do about that, we had spent some time talking with David about a way that we can articulate that in the FEIS. And I think your suggestion, which I think is a good one, is that that the additional taxes will benefit the taxpayer, and the issue with the school district is a separate issue.
So I'm going to just debate that one more time, to say that I think, I agree with you about those points. I think that what the school district is also saying is that they're getting to a breaking point in terms of, where they feel like they can sustain any kind of added development within the confines of their current walls, right? So what's built? And how do you get to the next point of actually being able to accommodate new development? In many other communities, what they do is ask the developers to chip in to start paying for some of those capital costs to improve the schools so that you have room without overcrowding within the walls. So whether you have to build a new building or extensions to buildings or whatever that is, as you add more density, you need to also add more building. So that's, I think, a fair way that those two play together, and you don't just feel your pain, you help offset the pain. So, I think that that's something that, needs to be considered, and in New Rochelle, they do require payments for in that regard, as I understand it.
Absolutely,
Right.
and I think that was what was behind the $350,000.
Right. I'm just not sure where that number came from. I know you worked with the school district. I don't know that the school district has even defined for us where that number came from, and I don't know that you have either, so I think that's also something to still
Yeah,
have an
Glenn can
understanding about for
explain how
us.
we-
We
Well,
don't.
Add one thing to that. So New Rochelle in particular has, and you can go on the website as well, they have, for all of their new developments, pilots, payment in lieu of taxes, which are graduated pilot payments, and they start out very low, and the quid pro quo is affordable, whatever else is being asked of the developer by the municipality. But the receiving end for the developer is a 15 or 20-year essentially reduced tax, so that the building can get up and operating and stabilized, and that all of these exactions can be, amortized over the project. This does not have a pilot.
I think that's a good point. I think also, we sometimes get in this conversation, but we do have to take into consideration that most of the developable properties are as of right. So they're going to be developed one way or another. So it's not a question of whether something will be developed. So this process is to optimize that for the greatest good and the benefit of everybody. And I think that when we talk about the schools, we all recognize what an important issue it is. But I think sometimes the conversation becomes an all-or-nothing proposition, and I don't believe that's on the table. And I think we all have to remember that, too, that we're trying to optimize that. And I do think that we could learn a lot from communities like New Rochelle that have optimized a formula for that give back. I don't think we're there yet in terms of that, and I think that drives some of the difficulties of these discussions, but it's something we should be striving towards.
I agree with you, and I think that, the master development plan that New Rochelle's come up with is fantastic, but they're also a big city, and they have a lot more money to spend on all of those sorts of plans and notions than we do, honestly. But it's something that we can learn from, and as we move forward and look at updating our comprehensive plan with sustainability elements, which we just got a grant to do, we will absolutely consider what it is that we can do to make it easier for anything to be developed here in Ossining within what the community believes in the direction that we should be moving forward with. So, are there questions from other board members? Do you have any other comments or any other conversation? No? No? Okay. Mr. Stallman, is there any other direction that you wanted to give us in terms of our deliberations as we react and/or comment with, to Glenn and Annette about the proposal. Is there anything else you think that we should be focusing our attention on at this moment?
I think we've covered quite a bit tonight. As Christie was saying, this is at the planning board now. The planning board is reviewing has reviewed, and we'll be discussing tomorrow night aspects of the preliminary final environmental impact statement. I think that'll be, once that's drafted, and it's got to be in the planning board's voice, the lead agency's voice. So it's going to get modified somewhat from the state it's in now, and it's going to have this analysis of various alternatives. And I think it will be worth reading the document that's accepted by the planning board, because it will be in the planning board's voice, and then there'll be a finding statement that'll also be in the planning board's voice. And some of this may change. So I think that's going to be excellent reading for the town board in preparation of the town board drafting its own finding statement. So I think that's where we're headed.
Okay, and I just wanted to say one, okay, go ahead.
Just one quick thing. Glenn, I am happy with the stormwater runoff plan. I'm happy with the set-aside of the conservation easement for the rest of the property. I'm happy with the plan on the highway. I'm happy with most of it. So I hope it works.
Thank you.
And to follow up, did you have something, were you about to say something? No. Okay. That was you. And it was out of the corner of my right eye. To follow, just to go off of that, I also think that, that the project has a lot of benefits for the community. I know that there are a lot of people who are very fearful of the size and the impact on traffic, but to Councilwoman DeTore's point also, there is, you can build as of right 30 units or 67 units, and those, not 67, that's
based upon the R5 zoning.
Right.
This property is not.
Okay, right, so this is R15, right?
R15.
Right, so you could build 30, and maybe even, you could squeeze 35. I'm just saying, how many bedrooms would that equate to, for example? Starting to looking at that and looking at the impact of what you could build as of right and how it impacts the environment and how it impacts stormwater and how it impacts traffic. We have a lot of that information before us, and I think that it really is worth the board considering. I think, for the community, we're looking at the big picture. All of us here on this board live in single-family homes. We all live in this community. All of us are actually in the Austin School District. And so we know, that this would impact us in different ways. Some better than others. But I think that, we're looking at this holistically, and we're considering the proposal holistically and looking at every aspect of it. Just as the planning board is looking at many aspects of it, we're thinking, how is it going to impact the community? And I don't necessarily think that this board thinks that only single-family homes would work there. I just want to say that for the record. I think that that's my sense. I could be wrong, but that's the sense that I get. So I think that we do want to, we're hoping to continue working forward positively to find what seems to be the right size. I don't necessarily believe that everybody on this board thinks this is the right size, even though some may. I do think that that's going to be an ongoing conversation to try to get to what that right size is, and I hope that it's not 188 or bust. That's all I have to say, and I think that Councilwoman Feldman is with me on that, and I have a feeling some other council members are with me on that as well.
Well, I tried to give you as best an idea as to why that number is what it is. I think, there are all sorts of side benefits too, that the downtown, in terms of this profile, wanting to use restaurants and services and retail, banking services. I personally, I would not, this is a beautiful site. When you get on top, and it really, we should all get out there. I've taken, I think, all of you out there at one point or another, but it's been a long time. You really can't understand the site unless you walk it. It's much, much bigger because you go up and down, and it has a much bigger feel when you're out there. But when you're out there, the areas that we're talking about preserving, we've really gone to great lengths to try to, we had an earlier plan that built on that whole back side, which I think you've seen now. And, you know, through conversations with the neighbors and with the boards, we pulled that back and condensed it to one building on top of the site. So my view is if you had 30 to 40 homes that blanketed that site, used up all of the green space, took down all of the trees, the roadways would be 4 times as many. The stormwater basins would be 4 or 5 times as many. We have 4 right now. It would probably be up to 20 stormwater basins. You'd have way more utility lines, and you would just have this big open site. The people over on First and Second and Narragansett would be looking at the backyards of people who, you don't know how they're controlling that. The same for Grandview and down on Pershing. And so in this case, they're going to have green. They're going to have professionally managed open space by the project, as opposed to, you know, 40 homeowners all doing different things. So you should just keep that in mind.
Glenn, just one quick question. When you're talking about that, I know that in your plan it is to preserve a lot of space and create some walking trails and things like that. What would, you know, one of the things that to give back to is the ability for other people in the community to enjoy some of those amenities. And what is, right now, how do you envision that?
Well, the pool is right next to the building. We don't see the pool being used by others.
Right.
That's private space. We have had conversations with Westchester Land Trust, and we're going to continue those conversations. There's a trail system that we would like to be part of. We think that would be an amazing amenity to be able to have our people, and conversely, people outside can traverse it. I love that. So that discussion's happening.
So you want to tie into our walking and biking plans?
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to get to.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Oh, I heard this.
Yes.
Make it more walkable,
Build a
bikeable,
sidewalk and
and
a
tie
bike,
into the
bike lane.
community.
I mean, people love to hike and all do all that stuff today. So yes.
Well, just on the other side of 9A is where the Briarcliff Peekskill Trailway is.
Well, I think one of the nice things, I think, even though that the Ginsburg project, you know, had its supporters and its detractors and was, I would say, somewhat controversial, one of the nice things that resulted is a usable public space. So the grounds of the property are used by people, the pool's not, but the grounds of the property are used and pretty well utilized by people in the community. I do think that is perceived as an asset.
You did at one point talk about a community garden, and I know that the village was looking for space for a community garden within walking distance of the village, and that space that's in the village might be.
I haven't heard that one in a while, but
Yeah. Anyhow,
Take a
I
look
think that's
at
on the front part of the property. Anyhow,
but we are going to have a connection down to the park, to Veterans Park.
Veterans Park, yeah,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
All right,
Yes.
thank you.
Is there anything else? Anything else? No. Did you want to say anything else? I thought you were about to say something before. No? Did you want to just comment on that, the next steps? Or you go?
I guess after the DEIS, when you held a work session, you actually held a couple of work sessions, one that Glenn attended kind of in the same format as now, and then there was a subsequent work session where you continued your dialogue and then ended up submitting comments to the planning board for consideration. And so it may be fruitful to follow that procedure again. And if the board wanted to submit any comments on the FEIS in terms of the topics that you've discussed this evening, that may be beneficial during the secret process.
Okay. Sounds good. So then maybe we'll pick another date for follow-up to discuss what we want to be included in that. And in terms of the,
I was going to say, besides
Timing.
drafting a finding statement,
Yes.
the planning board, under the code, presents a report to the town board regarding the rezoning itself.
okay. Fair. Fantastic. Okay.
So at what point in the process would that happen? Would that be after seeker was done, if the rezoning application was before the town board?
Right, because I think it's premature until the seeker process finishes to draft something like that. So
Right.
maybe it would come at the same time as the finding statement or,
Shortly
a bit thereafter,
something like
yeah.
that.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation and the response and the very large study that you've done and that you're continuing to work on. We look forward to continuing our discussions, and again, hopefully we can move forward fruitfully and productively in a way that is going to be supportive of our community and make it better, because that's why we're here, all of us on the town board. Thanks, everybody. Let me just see, just wanted to remind everybody again that we have our Project Forward meetings on January 17th, which is this Thursday, from 1 to 2:30 at the library in the cafe area on the lower level. And did I say, I keep saying the wrong time. I am so sorry. I've had it in my head for the wrong time. So that's 2 wrong dates to say. 12 to 1:30 and 7:30 to 9 p.m. this Thursday, January 17th. Thanks, everybody, for coming out tonight to observe our work session. We anticipate continuing to receive comments on this application, and we look forward to many of you at the library on Thursday. Please remember to prepare for the bad weather that has been predicted. Otherwise, we will see you at our regular meeting at the courthouse next Tuesday, January 22nd. Have a wonderful week, and please do something good for the world on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Thanks.